It was a gut feel that this is different. I hadn't felt this way in at least 20 years. Definitely with the release of ChatGPT and it spreading wild, a couple of years ago. Like this is going to make us rethink how teaching and learning looks like, how classrooms look like, what we value. We're going to have to have conversations about this, and so I think it was a bit of a gut feel early on, but it really just felt different.
Welcome to another episode of the Education Matters podcast. This week, we're talking with Chris Kennedy. Chris has spent his entire professional life in public education in British Columbia, from English and social studies teacher to principal to his current role as superintendent of schools in the West Vancouver School District. Chris is one of the most respected voices in Canadian education, known for his forward-thinking leadership, his early and thoughtful embrace of emerging technologies, and his deeply human approach to the work of school and system transformation. He was one of the youngest superintendents in the country when he took the helm over a decade ago, and in the years since, he's led with equal parts curiosity and conviction. He's been featured in Maclean's magazine, written extensively on personalized learning, and has consistently used his blog, Culture of Yes, to share ideas and provoke new thinking across the sector. In our conversation, we explore Chris's early life growing up in Richmond, BC, in a family of educators, and funny enough, including his first year teaching alongside his own mother at the same school he met his now wife. He reflects on the impact of community, the experience of struggling with reading as a child, and the enduring lessons that shaped his career. We also dig into what great teaching looks like today, why diverse school leadership matters, including diversity of age and perspective, and how education leaders can thoughtfully support both innovation and human connection in an era of rapid technological change. Chris also shares his district's approach to AI in education, including what excites him, what concerns him, and why he believes AI should amplify human flourishing and not replace it. He talks about the danger of simply automating outdated practices, the need to reimagine assessment, and how digital transformation must always be rooted in equity, trust, and clarity of purpose. This conversation is about innovation, leadership, and the need for education systems to stay rooted in what make us human, especially as the world changes faster than ever before. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Chris Kennedy. Chris Kennedy, welcome to the podcast. Where does the podcast find you today?
Hi, Jason. It finds me here on the traditional lands of the Squamish Nation in West Vancouver, British Columbia.
Excellent. Well, thanks for joining, Chris. You've been probably one of my oldest connections and real educators to the whole K-12 space over the years. So I've been pretty excited to have you on, but wanted to save someone that I knew well and whose work I knew quite well until I had a few podcasts under my belt. So thanks for joining.
Well, Jason, it's been fun to watch your podcast series. It's a great way of telling the Canadian story of education and helping spread the good word about the work that's happening across our country.
Well, thank you, and hopefully we can continue for many more. But today, let's dive into the world of West Van School District. But we're going to start, Chris, like we always do, with a bit of the background of the superintendent. So can you give the audience a sense of where and when you grew up?
Yeah, so I'm in my 30th year in education, but I grew up locally here in Richmond, in British Columbia. I went through school in the public system, K to 12, and it ended up my first teaching job was back at my junior high, where I had been helping coach some basketball, and ended up back there. And in my first year of teaching, I ended up on the teaching staff with my mom in the first year. So teaching's been in the family, and everything was pretty tight early on in terms of how close everything was.
I didn't know that. What was that like?
It was okay for a year. My mom had one of those shirts with me and my brothers on it, like when we were like 8 years old, that she would wear that iron on with the photo on the front. she'd wear that sometimes. She was a proud mom, but it was okay. But it was probably, especially when I met my wife at that same school. Everything got a little too close. It was time for everybody to move on after a while.
I had no idea. That's a fun story. Was your mom like mine? Like I used to go to her school district on my PD days when my school was off, and my mom was a different human being. Like she was no nonsense. Of course, very loving and caring with the kids. But man, she ran that class like a general. What kind of teacher was your mom like, especially when you were there as a teacher yourself?
Yeah, so no, it was kind of funny. My parents are both teachers, and I'm much more like my dad. I'm a little more quiet and reserved, and a little more private. My mom is the one who tells stories every single class, and so I would have kids come to my class after being in her class, and they had just been told some story about when I was growing up and what happened, and what happened on summer vacation, and so there was. She's a wonderful storyteller and makes all kinds of connections. But for someone who likes to have a little bit of privacy, it was a little bit much for me some days.
I can also imagine what those staff meetings were like.
Yeah, right. Eh?
So, Chris, take us back even before that. So, we share that as well, that, we're both raised by educators. But growing up in Richmond when you did, like, how did you play as a child?
Yeah, and so definitely growing up in a family of teachers was important, and they were very involved in with our sports and my mom was a music teacher, and so a lot of music in the home. My dad was really helpful in terms of helping coach our sports teams, and I probably saw those values of school early on because I saw them giving to other people's kids lots of time outside the workday, but then also finding time for us as well in terms of supporting us. And so that notion of community, of you support other people's kids, knowing that other parents and other adults will support your kids. Something I sometimes think we've lost a little bit of, where everybody just looks after their own kids these days. But I really grew up in the sense of that community approach to school and more broadly to where we grew up.
Hmm. What was one of the first things you truly remember loving to learn?
Hmm. Um, I think one of the first things I loved was actually I loved to learn about geography and history right from a young age. It's in elementary school I was so curious about Canadian politics, about American politics. I remember teachers that really engaged me with that in elementary school. And it was something that like I always found it weird. Most people didn't seem that they cared that much about it, but I just soaked it up and loved it. It was the era of all those TV documentaries that would come on all the time too, and I would love to watch those. And so from a really young age, I was very interested in more broadly sort of that social studies, and probably led to some of the things I did later on in terms of high school and university and in my early teaching career.
Yeah, I kind of feel that a whole generation is missing out on having that globe in the classroom that you would spin and put your finger on and then learn about that place, or at least inquire about that place.
Absolutely, yeah, those are good memories.
Um, so is there anything about your upbringing in general that you wish, your kids, for example, could experience?
Yeah, like I think there's lots of talk these days about how great it was to grow up in the 70s and 80s, and like going outside and playing with your friends and not as much on digital devices. And so I guess I think we've really tried to work in our house. My wife and I, as we were teachers and grew up in that same era, tried to create that for our own kids. Being really involved with sports and teams and community. And so I definitely think I've tried to replicate lots of it. I also think though we have to be careful about romanticizing what it was like growing up, and the world changes and things change around us, and so I think we have to be careful about saying too quickly, hey, everything was great when in the 80s, and now in the modern world, kids don't really, it's not the same, it's not as good. Every era is different, and I think you make the most of it. Try to make the most of it based on the circumstances of the time, and got to be careful about just playing to that easy sort of story that everything used to be better, and if the whole
Hmm.
world would be better now if it was just like it used to be. Well, like there was a bunch of things that weren't really great when we grew up too. We kind of
Hmm.
we gloss those over as time goes by.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Is there anything that you would change about your own education?
Yeah, so I think I was fortunate that I had my parents were advocates for me. So I was a really I had learning challenges when I was young. I didn't learn. I While most of the kids could learn to read when they were in by grade one, I couldn't. I still remember, and this is the part probably I would change is that you got colored readers, the purple group and the green group, and I
Mm.
didn't get any reader because I wasn't able to read yet, and so I know I was singled out and sort of marginalized for those kind of things, and fortunately I had parents who were teachers who advocated for me, and weren't going to tolerate me not being included and being I was a late birthday and a boy and all those things that why sometimes it's a little bit where that when you're 5 or 6 years old, maybe it's a little bit slower for some kids, and everybody's at their
Mm.
own pace. I think if I would go back and I wish I would have been treated as somebody on a continuum rather than somebody who was competing with the other kids in their class, and that definitely set me back in that feeling that I was chasing at a very young age, and I still have memories of that to today.
Mm. So, if I can ask you now to kind of turn your attention to the 30 years plus that you've spent in education, um, and describe some of the most inspiring things you've seen as an educator. And the reason for this question really is, Chris, is that um, I think I learned by visiting your district and others in BC and across Canada, really, that there are really amazing things happening every day, and all we hear in the news media are these negative stories. So I want to give the audience, a sense of some of the most inspiring things that are happening across the country. What are some examples that come to mind?
Yeah, absolutely. I think they're almost always around people. Like the inspiring things that are happening are driven by just like amazing teachers who are doing such cool things in their classrooms. And so I saw that early on when I began as a teacher. I immediately saw there was a colleague of mine, Doug Shepard, who was making the science classroom just come to life. And it was, I had thought science was so boring, and he was doing such engaging activities, and so saw what he was doing. And then when I moved into school administration, I moved from Richmond out to Coquitlam. I saw those passionate educators who were taking really challenging curriculum, and connecting to a whole bunch of a range of students. And then when I think about my time here in West Vancouver, I think of things as varied as I think many of the ones that stand out are ways that teachers have taken their passions and then have helped bring kids along. Teachers who are passionate about outdoor learning and they built outdoor education programs, passionate about robotics and built these world-class robotics programs. Passionate about digital technologies and have integrated computers and then the web and now AI into their classrooms. That they teachers take what they deeply care about, and they integrate that in their work. And so I think sometimes we think you want every classroom to be the same, and I think just the opposite. You want teachers to play off their strengths and their passions,
Hmm.
and build learning experiences for children often around that.
So you just described like a variety of different subject areas and classrooms that you've seen really inspiring things happening in. Is there a commonality though to what the best classrooms look like, sound like, feel like?
Yeah, it's funny that when I began my career, the best classrooms were often quiet classrooms where kids were seen to be working, and it's a bit stereotypical. At least those are the classrooms that I know I went through school and when I began my career. The best classrooms now are often like super engaging. Kids are on doing different things at the same time often. Some kids are on devices. No, some kids aren't on devices. There's different kinds of seating arrangements in classrooms. There's a power. The power used to be in the teacher. Now the power is in the room. The teacher still has they're clearly the teacher. They're the guide in the room, and they're highly respected by their students, but they're not exerting power in a traditional way with young people anymore. That they share that, and they build classroom routines and culture together. I think you see that, and you see that across grades, across subject areas. It's funny that like you can go into such a diverse group of classrooms, but you can feel that same kind of dynamics and culture in them, and you just know those are places where kids are in that flow of learning.
So, what are the qualities that you most admire in teachers that create these classrooms?
I love teachers that are always thinking about like not going to do this next year the way they did last year. We're just starting a new school year, and the teachers I admire are ones who are thinking about, well, so how what am I going to do differently? What is it I can do to that I take what I did last year and build off of that? And the world's changing, kids are always changing. I actually feel sad for teachers that try to teach one year and then repeat it 35 times, like because there probably still are some of those, but like what's exciting about the profession is that every group of kids is different, and every year is different, and the world is changing, and what we know about how kids learn is changing. And so like those are the kind of things those are the teachers that make that I'm excited to connect to, because they're coming in excited about the profession.
And if I can ask you to, say a little bit about how central the role of the principal is in making all this kind of really, intriguing and interesting learning happen. I feel that it's an area across the country. I know a lot of people do not want to go into administration for a lot of reasons, but I don't think they quite understand how important that role is, one, and two, how fulfilling that role can be.
High school principal, I probably shouldn't say it because I'm being the superintendent here, but high school principal was my favorite job. Oh, I loved it. And I loved it. I knew I would love it because I had two amazing principals I worked with early in my career, Gail Sematic and Kent Chappell. And I just saw the difference they were making. How much I admired them, how much, they created a culture. They support people. I knew I would love that work. It's what drew me to it. I think, and then I love being a high school principal. It's like you're creating this own little village of 1,400 students, 100 staff. It's a community that has to figure out how they're going to work together. You have a fair bit of actually autonomy within a school to make it as you like as a community. That a principal has a huge impact in terms of the tone and the culture, and as do superintendents. Where superintendents spend their time gets noticed, and where principals spend their time gets noticed. And so if you want to invest in classrooms and teaching and learning, principals get into classrooms. That like I just think I think being a school principal is just an awesome job, and one that I love doing, and I see how much the folks in our district love being principals and vice principals as well.
And then the last part of this equation that makes up the whole education community are the parents. What do you feel are the most important things for parents to understand about education generally?
Yeah, so I think our greatest challenge is always working with parents. We have new parents every year, and all of our parents have a notion of what school is based on their own experiences, which is often 10 to 20 years out of date or 30 years out of date. And most parents feel like whether they kind of have romanticized their own school experience, and they want their child to do what they did in school. And even if it wasn't great for them, they kind of feel like I want my child to have that same experience. And so like the work we need to do, we always need to continue to do with parents is to help them see how schools are shifting, the world's shifting, and that there are some tenets that will be similar, and the values attached to school might be similar than when they went to school. But in terms of what we do in school, we actually want it to look different than when we went to school. And every year there's a new crop of parents. And so that's an ongoing education piece with parents about bringing them into the system and helping them understand. We're
Mm.
trying to prepare students as citizens and as employees and as leaders for the changing world. And so it needs to look different than it looked like 30 years ago.
Can you talk a little bit more about how you're bringing parents into the school community? Because one thing in my own experience with my kids here is, and I kind of knew this going in, and it hasn't changed much, unfortunately. Like school feels like a black box. You know what I mean? Like I talk to the teachers twice a year, at interviews. We see them at the school events, but by and large, it's kind of like a black box. The learning isn't really shared. I mean, I get the tests when they come home. I get the grades when they come home, but I don't really have, other than the experience of my child, the sense of what their day to day is like, what their community is like there, what their class is like. Are you doing anything in West Van to kind of help open up the parents and community's view of individual classrooms or schools in general?
Yeah, let me hit that from a couple different ways. One is, I think first of all, we're trying to upskill parents with good questions they can ask their children when their kids come home from school, so that they don't just have those conversations with their kids. How was school today? It was fine. What did you do? Nothing. Those
Right.
like there are better conversations. If you feel like you're not getting enough about what's going on in your child's school, then some of that is on you as a parent to ask better questions. And so that's the first part. And the second part is, I think we are in some places, though still inconsistent, we've done a better job of opening up classrooms through the use of things like digital portfolios
Hmm.
and making that assessments are shared more regularly, and that we're using tools. We're using some of those digital tools to open up our classrooms to be a little more transparent. I'd also say that I think some parents want to know everything that's going on all the time in their child's
Right.
class, and that's actually
Right.
not healthy. You actually need to let your child go and live a little bit, and
Yeah.
a little bit of separation is good. And then what we're trying to do is, whether that's, I try to do that through my blog about trying to open up about, hey, this is
Mm.
what we're thinking, and try to
Mm.
try to demystify the work we're doing. We have this opening day where we bring in a speaker to kind of set the tone for our year with all of our staff. We're going to bring that speaker in to do a parent education night. We try to
Mm.
do that whenever we bring in somebody to do teacher education. We try to also bring them in to do parent education.
Mm.
I think of the work that we're doing around AI right now. That we're trying to do parent ed the same that we're trying to do staff education. So that at least we're all hearing the same messages and opportunities, and then recording these kind of pro-D, and so that you can go back, because and trying to help our parents gain some of the same skills that we're all trying to gain around the world that's changing around us.
Yeah, I think those are awesome examples. Um, so, Chris, if I can ask you now to turn to the role of the superintendent, I think you have quite a unique perspective here in that, as far as I know, you were one of the youngest, if not the youngest superintendent in BC, if not all of Canada. What was that like being in that role, relatively young?
Yeah, like it was interesting now in retrospect to look back. And so I was a principal I was a vice principal at 27, a principal at 29, and by 35 I was a superintendent. And it I think what it did was it was interesting being in the room and having a very different view of the world than many of my colleagues who were 20
Mm.
years older than I was, and especially around some of the digital pieces. And so I think I was able to bring some of those early days of Web 2.0 and some of those, incorporate those into the practice of the superintendency that were really foreign to a lot of my colleagues around me. But I got to say, like, colleagues were so warm and welcoming. I think of the folks here in British Columbia, like Mike McKay, and then Jordan Tinney, and others who really were super welcoming to me and to the superintendency, really supportive. I had this really interesting model here. I was appointed superintendent and then worked with the existing superintendent for a year transition as
Mm.
he moved to retirement. And that was
Mm.
also really helpful, that I was able to move into the superintendency like that and try to transition in a thoughtful way. And I think there's something to be learned from that. Like, like we were doing new things, but there was a sense of continuum as well. And so we actually did a talk together as we made the transition, where he opened up about what the last decade was, and I shared what I saw to be the
Mm.
next decade. But like there wasn't a sense of like a jolting, one person leaves and everything stops, a new person comes in with all their new stuff. It was a sense of we're going to continue to evolve where we've been, and it's into going to new places. And so I think I was really lucky that way.
Yeah, and I wonder, and let me pose this as a question to you. Like, do you think we miss the opportunity to give younger leaders the same chance? Because you have been, and just let me qualify that for the audience for a bit. Like, you really have been, for the last decade that I've known you, seen as one of the most progressive superintendents in the country. And I do think that's in part because you had an intimate understanding of the, let's call it Web 2.0 world, right? Or of the digital world that a generation older than you didn't have. So you, for the last, the 10 years that I've known you, have been on this really progressive journey. Don't you think that we're missing the opportunity, because that your story is like one of one. I haven't heard anybody becoming a superintendent at that age. And I think especially now, as we shift into not only a whole new way of educating students, but a new economy, a new paradigm really, that we could benefit from some folks that are more closely related to the experiences that a lot of incoming teachers are having, that a lot of families are having. And I think that could help the system really, really evolve in a necessary way.
I think I'll be more broad than that. I think it is important to have a diversity amongst your leadership team, and that
Mm.
diversity includes a diversity of age, includes
Mm.
gender diversity, includes cultural diversity, but it does include also age diversity. And I look, we've got vice principals in their 20s, and to leaders into their 50s and 60s. I think districts who are segmented with all the principals are in their 50s and 60s. That's not healthy. Just like it's not healthy if all your principals are men.
Right.
Just like
Yeah.
it's not healthy if all your principals are white. That all of those kind of, like, it's healthy to have diversity, and
Yeah.
part of that is sort of is an age diversity. And I think it was healthy for BC to have a range of ages of superintendents, and I happen to be the young one in the group, and I brought a bunch of different ideas that were different. And because I'd grown up in the system, I had never known teaching not to have the internet. And
Mm.
when I joined the superintendency, I would have been the only one like that. And so that was different. And I brought something to the table that made the group better. And so I think diversity makes the group better, and whatever that diversity looks like. And I'm super happy about how we have such a diversity of age. When we hire folks newer in their career into admin, I'm hoping they push our system along,
Mm.
because I like to think that was part of my role as I got into both school and district administration at a young age.
Yeah, I mean, as you're talking there, you made a great point, because I think too there's a lot of value from folks that were educated in the 70s and 80s, because I think a lot of those good practices will come back and will be necessary now in the age of AI. So that's a great point, and also might be a great segue to talk a little bit about the work that you're doing in the district, and kind of leading the province along with a number of other folks as well. When it comes to AI, why was it such a focus for you relatively early on, when not many businesses or industries were thinking and talking about AI?
It was funny. It was a gut feel that, wow, this is different. I hadn't felt this way in at least 20 years. I remember hearing early days Web 2.0, and Alan November was somebody who I went and I saw him speak. And then, a friend of ours, Dean Sharesky, and some others who were early days in sort of the web world. I'm going, wow, this is Web 2.0 and interactive web and the internet. It's going to change classrooms. And then for the last 2 decades, everybody had said, like, oh, we're going to have virtual reality, and that's going to change classrooms. We're going to have this, and none of it really felt like it felt.
Right.
Oh, this is kind of interesting, but this isn't actually transforming what we think about how the relationship in a classroom looks like. But almost immediately from then even prior, but definitely with the release of ChatGPT and it's spreading wild, a couple of years ago, like this is going to let it make us rethink how teaching and learning looks like, how classrooms look like, what we value. We're going to have to have conversations about this, and so I think it was a bit of a gut feel early on, but yeah, it really just felt different.
Well, the timing of this interview was great because you just released a blog on AI and some really you posed some really poignant and great questions that I'd like to kind of discuss here. And then you can judge whether I've been a good student and did my reading properly. But you wrote, and I quote, "The real question is, will we guide this change in AI, with wisdom, or will it guide us?" Can you expand upon that a bit?
Yeah, like I think at times over the last 25 years, we've kind of let technology take the lead and we just followed it in education. And like here come the iPads. Okay, so we're using iPads in the classroom. Okay, here comes the web. And so rather than us think, what is it we want to do and how could technology help us do that? Help us do things maybe we've always envisioned doing, but we've never been able to. I think of it with AI about like, there's a lot of talk about 21st century learning, and so much of it built around this idea of personalization. So we've wanted to personalize learning to make it so a little bit so the flexibility for each and individual student. This idea that we talk about in our district, all means all, that each student has what they need to learn. So how can AI lead us to that? I look at especially in the United States right now, so many of school districts, teachers unions, you see it out of the federal government partnering with big tech companies. And I'm a little bit skeptical because I wonder, like, whose agenda is that? Is that the tech company's agenda or is that the school district's agenda? So I think we need to have, what is it we hope we can do with AI? And then let's help mold it in that way rather than just be here waiting for AI to do what it's going to do and us just follow it around.
Yeah, so I think that's a great point, and I think a good opportunity for me to ask you about. I think in an area that I'm not sure big tech companies are thinking about at all, and it's around equity, right? And you point out that AI can really either amplify inequities or serve as a force for equity. Do you have any sense of strategies or safeguards that you think districts should put in place to ensure like AI narrows rather than widens opportunity gaps?
Yeah, so I just think how we have to get quality tools into all students' hands, and so if there are certain AI tools that are good for some, and because they can afford it, but we can't get access to all for all students, then we're widening that gap. And so just as our district and so many others thought about with digital devices, like you have to have an equity plan around that. Like one-to-one's great, but one-to-one's not great if only half the kids can afford devices and you don't have a plan to get devices to the other half. Same is true with AI tools, is that you have to ensure that you have access, you be able to get them to all students. And then you have to be able to support the educators in a way that they can use them. And again, so that you don't have this idea of have and have not educators in terms of their professional support around it. I just think we have to continue to think about like people that go, wow, it's so amazing, it can do all these things. Are we making sure it can do those things for all of our learners? Some of the most powerful ways I've seen AI impactful so far are actually for some of those who would normally be marginalized. So those who are not first language English students who can use instant translation tools. For some students who have learning challenges who can use AI tools to help create adaptations on the fly for reading texts or math problems in a classroom. And so I want us to focus on what are those ways that it can help kids feel more included rather than less included in classrooms.
So AI is also really, really good at all the traditional assignments that you and I did growing up and probably gave in our early, created in our early part of our career. Um, in your article, you talked about essentially the difference between like how did you phrase it? I think like memory and meaning, right? A lot
Mm-hmm.
of the traditional assignments were essentially memory tests, right? Like how,
Right.
like if you had a great memory, you could actually not really understand a lot of it and get through it. What do we need to change now that we have a tool that our entire traditional educational paradigm is now susceptible to?
Yeah, so where I think the most powerful, impactful conversations in schools over the next 12 to 24 months are definitely around like what it is that we value and assess now. Because I love essays. I've
Yeah,
built my career on writing, and
yeah,
now everybody can write and can write quality work in with a push of a button through AI. And
mm,
so that's not in the same way a differentiator, but I can still out idea other people, because I think that that we have to think about how is it that we look at assignments differently. How is it that we can co-create with AI? I think the example I gave in the blog post was, what about co-writing a play with AI and then performing it, that how like that's in a drama classroom or an English classroom. Well, that's a different kind of assignment. So what are those
mm,
different kinds of assignments? And I'm also I also think there are times where you won't use AI, in class experiences that will be computer free or AI free. We kind of have adopted this the color scheme in a really simple way of sort of green, yellow, orange, red. Kind of red is no AI, green is full AI. I often talk about my blog posts are now kind of yellow. I write them
mm,
myself, but then I get a lot of feedback back and forth with AI. I ask it to challenge my assumptions I make. And so I think those are the kinds of assignments that we need to begin to think about how we create those in classrooms. I think the danger is that we just say, well, we're going to do everything in class, and so that we're going to test kids the way we always have. But like those skills are the skills that students need are different now. Students need to be able to identify bias and to
right.
be able to work alongside AI. And like it is a messy time, but like
Mm.
interesting and exciting time too. It frees up a lot of time, I think, to actually have conversations with students or to co-create with students. Those things that we've said are always valuable, but sometimes we actually haven't gotten to in classrooms.
Yeah, and I mean, I think BC and Alberta now too, as they launched their new curriculum that's in the same vein as the BC curriculum, um, really emphasizes a lot of this really good learning that is not, if I can turn it into a verb, AIable. So I think you're pretty well positioned in that sense. What are you doing to support staff in general as to make this transition? Like, just anecdotally, my friend group, family group, we're all extended teachers, and it ranges from, I'm using it every day to explore, to build new lessons, to I have no idea what that is. I'm not comfortable using it.
Yeah, we have teachers on the and staff on the continuum too, and so I've we continue to talk about encouraging all of our staff to use it in their personal life to get comfortable with it. That's sort of that
Mm-hmm.
first step. The next thing is they use it in their professional life to help them with lessons or to do things like to create things that help improve their profession. Then encouraging them to use it in classrooms, with students, and then encourage them to create lessons where students use it themselves. And so there is this continuum, and you can't everybody's kind of at their own place. And so it's okay to be where you are. It's just not okay to stay there right now. Like
Right.
we got to move folks along. And so we've invested staffing time. We have folks who have a bit of time in our high schools this year to be AI leads to support other staff. We have support in our elementary schools. We have AI working groups. We're trying to create a bunch of different structures and entry points. I think even just giving folks tools. I've said it before. Like I'm not married to any one tool, but we use Magic School AI, we use Brisk, we use a little bit of Gemini. That you pick a couple tools and then you can support folks with them. I don't find people that don't want to use it. It's overwhelming, and it isn't like we had this. You and I were talking earlier about age. I don't even find it age based. Some of our most who integrated AI the most into their profession are 25 or 30 years in. They're outstanding teachers, and they just saw this is the natural next place. But it is another thing. But why AI is sticky often is that people can find it, the efficiency side is, hey, it saves me time with creating lessons or with report card comments or with IEP development. And that makes it sticky. And then they'll come back to it and figure out, well, how might I use it with students to create new, different learning experiences as well?
Yeah, I think you've touched on it, but maybe you can put a finer point on it for the audience. This idea that you had in your article of diffusion versus mandating a resource or an approach. You kind of articulated there, but can you kind of put a fine point on it as to why you believe, especially with everything that's changing and happening with AI, you want to diffuse the learning as opposed to mandate it from the top?
Yeah, so I just find with change in general, like the best shifts happen when they sort of spread classroom to classroom, school to school. And I know people often when parents see something happening in a classroom, they just want the superintendent to mandate that thing to happen everywhere and assume it will happen in the same way in every classroom every day. But that's not how change works. And that's, how change works is that I see my colleague doing something and they're excited about it. I get curious. I learn about it. I try it in my classroom. Now, all of a sudden, 3 or 4 of us are doing it, so we're networked together. Now, all of a sudden, 2 or 3 schools are doing it, so we're networked together. On the broad scale with AI, West Vancouver's doing something, so we're networking together with other schools in BC and school districts across the country because we're trying to learn from each other. And so you kind of build learning networks and good ideas spread. And if it's crappy, it won't spread. So I think that it's a healthy way to go about bringing this kind of shifts.
So one key piece for me in the blog that you wrote was essentially, let me quote you, then I'll have you react to it. You said, and I quote, AI can provide information, but only people provide inspiration, end quote. And that's, I thought, a lovely line. And that's your way of getting to, I think, the broader point that I'm fully on board with, and I've started doing a lot of work in the area of really like education and AI for human flourishing. If that's not the end to support people, then we're getting it wrong. What's the balance like, or can you express why you wrote that and why you're focusing on, although there's going to create tremendous efficiencies in everything we do, the core of it needs to be focusing on what makes us human and what keeps us human?
Yeah, my worry for AI is that we become a system where AI creates an assignment for a teacher, and then students get AI to write that assignment, and then it goes back to the teacher who assesses it with AI. What are we doing here? And that AI at its best can help amplify, create some efficiencies, and create, students can partner with it and amplify the humanness of us all. And that we have more time for discussions in classrooms, and whether that's a different take on the notion of flipped classrooms, where you actually have time to work together and collectively and do those things that we've always said are important, but we do them more often. I think teachers are more important, schools are more important than ever in the world of AI, because those are the places of building community, and that community is built through people, not through the technology. And so I think AI does not diminish the role for teachers in schools. It has the opportunity to free up us to be able to more closely live to what we believe to be our purpose.
My sense to that point is the way we get there is to really figure out assessment. And I think Like there's been lots of starts and stops. I think AI presents a really unique opportunity to do assessment differently. Do you have that same sense? Like I feel like the whole thing is hinging upon like freeing up the time for everybody. To me, from the outside again, seems like the bottleneck is assessment, is reporting. Right? Like you mentioned using AI for report card comments. Like report card comments, Chris, are fugazi. You know what I mean? Like everybody knows it. It's like report card comments are the emperor wearing no clothes. Right? Everyone reads those comments. Everyone writes those comments. Principals check them, and I just think it's an antiquated process that's really bottlenecking the change in learning. Am I off there? Is too
Yeah, no,
strong?
well, I think there's also a fear that AI makes it harder to rank kids because and so much of school has been traditionally been about ranking people, ranking,
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
who's better than who, and who's good, like, and it's a sorting system so that we can sort who are the smartest kids and they'll go to the top universities, and who are the less smart kids and they'll go to the next tier of universities. And in the big scheme, isn't that what school is supposed to be about? It's supposed to be about ranking and sorting kids out. And AI, we've talked about this idea of kind of leveling a little bit. It makes it harder to rank students like we traditionally have. And so I think that's an interesting piece of this all. And I agree with you. Like, I think AI at its best helps speed up feedback. I find that, like with writing, my old way was I would often write and then I would get somebody to read it, and 48 hours later I'd get some feedback. Now
Hmm.
I can have like 5 drafts where I get AI to give me feedback before I pass it to somebody else, a human, to give me feedback when it's already close to being a final product. And so I think some of that is pretty exciting. But yeah, like, so how do we so what's good assessment? What kind of feedback do we need to give to learners? How do parents know how their students are doing in the world of AI? Like, super big questions that I think we need to
Mm.
wrestle with.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. So, Chris, now if I could, I think that's all great fodder for the next round of questions, which is like if you look, because you understand the present, I think more intuitively than a lot of other folks across the country. So, taking that knowledge of what's happening now and what you see in the short term, if I ask you to look forward, say, 50 years out into the future of education, and I know you're kind of an optimist by nature, but I want you to think about like the good, the bad, and the ugly. What does it look like 50 years? Like if we get it right, what does it look like? If we don't get it right, what will it look like?
Yeah, like if we get this right, schools are still human gathering places where, yeah, where we focus on big ideas and conversations, and where we the other area of focus for us in our district is around physical literacy and physical activity, where we get together to solve real world problems, where we engage in physical activity, where we connect to the outdoors, where we engage in the arts and music and drama and art and visual, and the whole visual and performing arts. Like, those are still, like, if we get it right, those are things that all still happen and where people get to pursue their passions. If we get it wrong, we just we let the robots dictate, and we have less meaning, and we turn the world over to machines. And I get the machines are going to become more and more powerful, and in the short window of time. But we need to marry that to the human experiences, so that, like, we're amplifying the sort of the human flourishing rather than diminishing the human capacity.
Wonderfully put. My penultimate question is always if you had a magic wand
Yeah.
and could do anything, um, and let's say all across Canada, you are, educations are for a day and you have an all powerful magic wand, what would you do?
Hmm. Yeah. So I guess I would have the whole country focus on the three things that we're focused on. So we're focused on innovation around AI and physical literacy. We think young people, to be active contributing members of our world, need to live in a digitally rich world, but we need to be physically engaged. The second thing I would do is to ensure everyone has access to high level literacy and numeracy skills and competencies. That even in the modern world, these are things that are still really important. And the third thing I would do is I would have as a nation, we would embrace this idea of all means all, and that no learners get left behind. And so whatever those, any of our marginalized learners or those who struggle, that everyone has access to the tools they need to be successful. And so, like, if we focused on that, those are what we're trying to focus on here. I think if we could focus on those broadly, like those, that creates the kind of society that I want to be part of.
Well, and we didn't get into as much as I would have liked to, but I love the fact, love, and you're the only one doing it, to my knowledge, where you're balancing this exploration of AI with physical literacy. And I think that's super important because, again, it's one of these very human aspects that has probably been, like underrepresented in curricula across the country. So I think that's awesome. Maybe we can have another chat about that with some expert in that field. I think would be interesting for the audience. But my last question, Chris, is always, what book, movie, music album, although I know you'll recommend Paul Simon, so we'll move off that, or podcast or anything of the sort would you recommend to the audience?
Well, yeah, I would recommend a collection of 1960s music would be my first recommendation. I saw Paul 4 times this summer, as I wrote about recently too. So that would be it. What would I recommend? I guess a theme I'm very interested in right now is this theme of longevity. And so rather than one particular podcast or one particular book, but it's sort of an emerging theme I've been reading about and thinking about and listening to and trying to embrace it in my own life. Maybe it's when you hit a certain age. So, you hit sort of 50 and you begin to think about how you want to ensure that you don't just live long, but you live well. And so I'm really interested right now on the things that we can do to keep our brain sharp, to keep our body sharp, so ensure that when we go 70, 80, or some people predict we might live far longer than that. I don't want to just live long. I want to live well. And so that next window of time are really good years. And so I guess if there was a theme I would encourage people to be thinking about, I think AI, it links back to that conversation around AI. I think AI and other emerging technologies are really going to shift how we are able to, how medicine and that is going to shift. And so just as I think it's going to shift education, I think it's going to have a dramatic impact on other parts of our lives and our ability to stay healthy. And so that's something that I'm spending lots of time engaged in these days.
Any book or podcast in particular? I listen to a lot of Peter Attia, who I think is a leader in the field. Is really interesting. It seems very balanced.
He's really good. Peter Diamandis. I read his book on longevity lately and listened to some of his podcasts as well.
Awesome, Chris Kennedy. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Jason. Fun to be with you.
This podcast is recorded on the territory and Treaty 13 lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and on the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat and the Haudenosaunee. The show is edited and produced by the marvelous and talented Andrew Mastroianni. If you like what you're hearing, make sure you subscribe to us on Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcast. Until next time, remember, there's absolutely no inevitability as long as there's a willingness to contemplate what's happening. I'm your host, Jason Bucheri. Until next time.